Hello and welcome to our webinar on delivering novel antibacterials to the clinic. Our speaker today is Stéphane Renard. Stéphane is responsible for projects in the severe bacterial infection area at the Evotec infectious disease site in Lyon, France. His current priority is the partnership with Nosopharm, whose lead compound Noso 502 is advancing towards clinical trials. His career started at Sanofi, where he spent 20 years initially as a laboratory head in the molecular and functional genomics department, and from 2009 as a laboratory head of the infectious disease unit, where he was a project team leader for a novel anti-gram-negative antibiotic project through lead to candidate phase. Stéphane has initiated several innovative approaches to identify antibacterial molecules, both growth inhibitors and inhibitors of virulence or persistence. He has been responsible for several collaborations with academic partners, one of them leading to the discovery of a potent, innovative antibacterial compound. Stéphane holds a PhD in cellular and molecular pharmacology from Nice University in France. So now, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy Stéphane Renard and his webinar.
The topic today is about how can we better deliver novel antibacterials to the clinic. As you have probably seen, there are very few novel molecules arrive to propose novel therapeutic solutions. So during this presentation, I will first show you in a few slides the extent of the medical need about antibiotic resistance. And then I will show you two bottlenecks that are really impeding the discovery of novel antibiotics. And I will highlight a few solutions to overcome those bottlenecks. And then very rapidly, I will show what we do in Evotec to transform novel antibacterials into therapeutic solutions by finding solutions on the path to the clinic, in particular, de-risking all the issues that can prevent a molecule from being successful. Antibiotics contribute much more than we think generally to worldwide health. In fact, if we look at the left cartoon, you can see the difference in causes of mortality 1 century ago and very recently. And you can see that at the beginning of the previous century, infectious disease were the main cause of mortality in the world. And this has disappeared because of vaccines and antibiotics. And now antibiotics are needed everywhere in healthcare. Prophylaxis relies a lot on antibiotics, and surgery, transplant, cancer treatments, etc. cannot be considered without the prophylactic use of antibiotics. But the future could be really grim, as exemplified by the O'Neill report, showing that if we do nothing in 30 years, the antimicrobial resistance could cause death to a level equivalent or superior to the cancer at the present time. And in fact, this danger is already present in some countries. Here, India is exemplified, but it's not the only country where we have already reports that people in hospital coming from diseases that cause a diminution of their resistance to bacteria, those people die very often from infectious diseases and bacterial infections. And this is not only India, but we have a very high level of antimicrobial resistance in the southern Europe, in many countries, and also in the US, even if it's underreported. You can see here with this timeline over the past century that we have discovered a lot of novel classes of antibiotics. Each color represents a different class, and the main molecules are exemplified. On top of the timeline, you have the first use in the clinic of each of those molecules. And at the bottom of the timeline, you have the first description in the clinic of resistance to those antibiotics. And you can see that resistance is described very rapidly to each novel antibiotics. But the fact is that resistance can be at a low level or can rise to a level that is unacceptable. This occurred in the 90s, as you can see, with nosocomial Staphylococcus aureus multi-resistant that become very common in hospital settings and then propagated to the community. And there was a very strong alert at this time that those gram-positive bacteria could be a real danger due to the resistance to antibiotics. Fortunately, the introduction of two novel classes of antibiotics, linezolid and daptomycin, in this decade brought a solution to the problem. And since then, gram-positive bacteria are considered less of a threat, and we saw the rise of gram-negative bacterial infections in the hospital, and the prevalence increased until 10 years ago, when it was really obvious that there was a main danger in hospitals. And recent reports have confirmed this fact. Problematically, we have no novel classes of antibiotics that have been discovered for the past 30 years for gram-negative bacteria. We have indeed some novel compounds, which are combinations of old compounds with beta-lactamase inhibitors, such as Vabomer or Avicaz, which are good solutions, but they are not really novel classes. We have those severe infections that are really deadly. In the US, they cause a lot of deaths that are probably highly underreported, but we must not only think in terms of death. When a patient in the hospital has a multi-drug resistant infection, we have a high morbidity, a longer hospitalization, a clear functional decline in the affected organ, and sometimes for a very long term, and a strong need for post-acute care. If we consider the disease in terms of long-term disability, the cost is much more than what we can consider with only the death. And on top of that, due to the diminishing value of current antibiotic treatment, we have seen an increased use of old and unsafe antibiotics, such as colistines or polymyxins. In terms of pathogen, what we observe in a recent report is that Klebsiella pneumoniae is the most abundant pathogen overall in nosocomial multidrug resistant infection. Not the most abundant in nosocomial infection, but in multidrug resistant infection. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is certainly the most deadly, and we have seen recently an increase of Acinetobacter baumannii rising. It's now up to 8% of multidrug resistance associated death in Europe, while it was totally absent 10 years ago. And it's been reported recently as 28% of extra drug-resistant encounters in the US. So we have a vicious circle because most often we only improve existing molecules. It's an obvious choice because those molecules are already in the clinic and have already proven their efficacy. So we improve them, and the bacteria improve their resistance by improving their enzymes or their way to resist those molecules. And the resistance spreads, and then the circle comes again. The only way to break the circle, and it was exemplified, as I have shown, for gram-positive pathogen, is to introduce novel classes of antibiotics. Daptomycin and linezolid did the job, and more recently Xelanta, for gram-positive pathogens. But we still need first-in-class molecules for gram-negative pathogens. The problem is that expectations are very high because all classes are very efficacious and have a good safety margin, and it's not obvious that novel classes of antibiotic can meet the expectations. Why do we have so many difficulties to find novel molecules? We have two bottlenecks that we need to overcome. Those two bottlenecks are the gram-negative permeability barrier, which I will exemplify in the next slide, because gram-negative bacteria have an inner and outer membrane, and also the fact that it's difficult to find novel targets for bacteria. And even when we find novel targets, it's very difficult to deliver compounds from these targets. I will explain it later. Can we break these two barriers? In terms of overcoming the permeability barrier, contrary to gram-positive pathogens that have only a single membrane, gram-negative pathogens have inner and outer membrane, and on top of that, they have a very efficient efflux system to remove molecules. So, a lot of molecules that are active on gram-positives because they can pass the membrane by being simply hydrophobic cannot pass the double barrier of gram-negatives. So, we can consider several possibilities to overcome this limitation, and I will show them on the next slide. we have seen several successful strategies in literature to break the permeability barrier. The most impressive has been several success stories with several chemical series showing that sometimes you only have to add one amine at the right position in the molecule to make it permeant, and mainly through porins, and penetrate gram-negative bacteria. But for having tried on many chemical scaffolds, it's not obvious to find such a simple solution for all molecules. Another solution is to use an adjuvant with the antibiotic, and the success story has been shown by Sperotherapeutics. You can disrupt the outer membrane and therefore help the penetration of molecules. People have tried for many years to block efflux, but this has never delivered molecules to the clinic. And the last strategy, which is really interesting, is to hijack bacterial transporters. To be successful in the host and to grow, bacteria need to express a lot of transporters. And those transporters are necessary to capture iron, in the case of siderophore transporters, or other nutriments. For the past 20 years, people have grafted siderophore, which are recognized by those transporters, on molecules. And very recently, we had a success story with cefiderocol, which is a cephalosporin grafted with a siderophore, reached the clinic and was successful in phase 3. So the idea to hijack transporter is a very interesting idea. Even if today we have only good examples with siderophore transport, we are pretty sure that we can find other transporters of interest. We are working on this topic. The second issue, the second bottleneck is bacterial targets. It's relatively simple to identify targets for antibiotics because a lot of genes have been demonstrated to be essential genes, which means that their function is absolutely necessary for bacteria to grow. This article 10 years ago by GSK shows that they have performed a lot of screenings on all of those genes that were identified as essential for bacterial growth. Unfortunately, very few of these genes proved to be good targets, and they tried to find inhibitors mainly for this, the functions of the proteins produced by these genes. And only 5 leads were delivered after 70 high-throughput screening campaigns, and none made it to the clinic. So why can't we transform an essential gene into an antibacterial target? If we look at what is an essential gene, the definition of an essential gene is a gene that you cannot delete because bacteria cannot grow without it. So if you delete it from the genome, you must supply another gene that can provide the same cellular function. So, which means that if you get rid of 100% of this function, bacteria cannot grow. The obvious idea is to think, let's prepare an inhibitor of this target. So you can make a screening, find an inhibitor, and the inhibitor will probably, if it's sufficiently optimized, inhibit 100% of the function of the gene outside the bacteria. Unfortunately, those molecules do not reach the same concentration in bacteria because of the barrier that I have exemplified before, and therefore it's almost never possible to inhibit 100% of the target. And therefore, even if the gene is essential, it's very difficult to chemovalidate it with an inhibitor. Why do we have some antibiotics that are successful if simply inhibiting a function is generally not efficacious? A very interesting paper by the team of Kishoni 6 years ago has tried to answer this question. What they did is very simple. If your antibiotic is only an inhibitor of the gene function, then if you overexpress the protein, you will diminish the efficacy of the antibiotic. That is the case for 2 of them, trimethoprim and coumaricin. If you overexpress the protein target, you see that you need more antibiotic to inhibit its function and to inhibit growth. But for most of the antibiotics that they tested, they do not find this kind of relationship. In fact, they demonstrated that if you overexpress the target, you can be toxic simply by overexpression of the target, in the case of PBP2, for instance, and you can see that if you overexpress the target, the compound becomes more potent. What is the interpretation of this? The interpretation is that, in fact, the inhibition of the target that is provided by the compound is not a simple inhibition, but it's a poisoning of the bacteria. By inhibiting the target in a special way, we provoke a toxic phenomenon in bacteria. So this is the case for several antibiotics. Gyrase or topoisomerase inhibitor provoke DNA damage. Aminosides disrupt ribosome function, but are bactericidal because they provoke the production of aberrant misfolded protein. ADEP4, which unfortunately is not targeting an essential gene, is deregulating a proteolytic activity. Since it's not essential, bacteria can resist very rapidly. It's also the case for peptidoglycan. We know that in isotonic medium, bacteria can grow without peptidoglycan. So beta-lactams do not work by a simple inhibition. And then we have the example of metronidazole, which is a prodrug transformed by bacterial metabolism into a DNA damaging agent, which means that all of these antibiotics, which are very successful, and probably more that from whom we have not discovered the exact mechanism of action, are not simply inhibitors, but they are damage inducer in bacteria. We can provoke DNA damage, irreversible division arrest, leakage, aberrant proteins, toxic byproducts, starvation, or waste of metabolites. So this is a key experiment to understand that maybe for the past 20 or 30 years, we have searched antibacterial molecules the wrong way. If we find a way for each of these essential targets to hijack it or to twist its function, to make it hyperactive, or to make poison, or to make deregulation, we would certainly be more able to find novel antibacterials with all of those interesting targets. So those are two examples of way to overcome the main bottlenecks of antibiotic discovery. And then I will very quickly show that we also need, and that is something that we provide at Evotec, because we have all the value chain of activities necessary to bring a molecule from the discovery to the clinic. It's very important all along the way to de-risk what we know about the molecule. De-risking is seeing in advance what could be the problems with the molecules and finding solutions. If we look at the cause of attrition in late drug discovery, for instance in preclinical, you see that the main cause of attrition is safety. We have also a cause of attrition for commercial reason, because the molecule has not the spectrum, for instance, to answer the medical need. We have attrition because of efficacy, because of anticipated clinical safety, also sometimes with pharmacokinetics and bioavailability. All of this can occur during the lifetime of a molecule from discovery to the clinic. And very often when we have attrition, it's because we discover too late that there is an issue and we have no time to solve the issue with the molecule. That's why we think that it's very important to have a very strong de-risking program for antibiotics in particular. And I can give you some examples. In terms of feasibility, we can have too complex natural products. So we need to design ways to synthesize them more easily. Hemisynthesis from natural product or total synthesis or some level of fermentation. For the spectrum, when the spectrum is too narrow to address a patient population, vectorization, such as with acidophore, is generally a solution. Resistance, we can have a very high frequency of resistance for some molecules and it can kill a project. But what is really the impact on a real infection? We discovered that with in vivo models of resistance, it's sometimes possible to de-risk resistance that appeared too complex to solve with only in vitro data. Metabolism, of course, rapid elimination of the molecule can be a real problem, and medicinal chemistry can solve it. Toxicity is very often overcome because when you compare the efficacy on bacteria and the efficacy, the toxicity on mammalian cell, we very often underestimate the fact that the serum can, by protein binding, can mask the toxicity of the molecule on mammalian cells. So we need to show that to compare efficacy on bacteria and on serum on mammalian cells in equivalent conditions, for instance, in the presence of serum, and only structure-activity relationship can show if we can have an improvement of a safety margin. And also, we have very often problems of in vivo efficacy with a limited effect compared to what we see in vitro. And for that, we need to generally to consider all of those previous problems, but also adapting the readout on the regimen of administration of the compound according to pharmacokinetics. So, as you can see, we have a lot of difficulties to overcome to develop novel antibiotics and to bring them to the clinic, but we also have a lot of solutions and we must be more bold when addressing the possibility to find novel molecules. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stefan, and I really appreciate the level of detail there, sort of highlighting the mechanisms and modes of action and how that can help to discover new antibacterials. So when you look at the pipeline of new projects coming through and then you look at the medical need, do you think the two are aligned? And if not, why would that be, do you think?
From what is in the clinic, it's not obvious that we are able, as of today, to bring novel classes of antibiotic to the hospital. But when we look at discovery and late discovery, there are several molecules that are particularly promising. Personally, I have the chance to work in partnership with Nosopharm, a company that is bringing a novel antibiotic scaffold, and we hope to reach the clinic in 1 to 2 years.
And just going over the final slides where you were talking about de-risking, you presented a few factors there, sorry. What would you say would be the main cause of attrition in discovery projects?
We have a lot of causes of attrition, but very early, the main cause of attrition is that we underestimate the cytotoxicity of the molecule. Very often, it's not difficult to find a molecule that kills bacteria, but if you do not realize that the molecule is also killing mammalian cells, you will only find a solution that kills the patients during the treatment. It's very important to very rapidly determine that your molecule has indeed a specificity for bacteria. It's possible to gain that specificity over time, but when we start with a very low margin, it's very difficult to improve. And all along the project, we encountered a lot of difficulties. Metabolism can really be a problem. We often say that, for instance, that natural products, plant extracts, could be very efficient against bacteria. That's the case in the lab, but they generally have very strong difficulties because they are metabolized very rapidly. So it's very difficult to transform a molecule that is active in a tube into a molecule that is active in a living host.
Of course, there's always that kind of challenge there, isn't there, replicating in biology. Thank you once again. That was a really interesting presentation. Thank you, Stefan, for your time.
Thank you.
This is the end of our event. Thank you very much for watching this webinar. We look forward to meeting you again. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.